coming.
Thanks. Looking forward.
So we'll wait a few minutes just to allow anyone else to join us, and then I'll introduce Dominique and the seminar.
Hi, Ralph. Hi, Dominic.
Hello, Sonia.
Hi, Sanya.
How's it going?
So Sanya is next week's speaker.
Yeah.
So Sanya, where are you right now?
Pretoria.
Pretoria?
Yeah, but I hope to move over to Cape Town next. It's the end of the month.
Great.
Yeah.
We'll all start to coalesce.
Hopefully.
So yeah, we'll just give it two more minutes. It's like 3 minutes past 5, and just give it 2 minutes till 5 past 5. And Divine says that there's been some requests for the recording. So yeah, so you'll know that people will be watching this on the archive.
Okay.
Yusra has joined us as well. And Chikezi. So welcome everybody. This is Huma's Attire series. the Humor Interdisciplinary Seminar Series, and this is our first seminar. And we're going to be hearing today from Dominique Somda, who is a researcher at Humor and my colleague. And welcome to the other researchers from Humor and the other audience that we have for the talk today. So Dominique is presently in Paris and will be in Cape Town soon. And today we'll be talking about Deep South politics from her paper, Frontier Imaginaries in a Zone of Exception. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the subject, which is to do with the south of Madagascar, where there's been a resurgence of violent cattle rustling. I'm particularly interested in hearing about some of the narrative influences on the cattle rustlers that is mentioned in Dominique's abstract, including looking at Western movies for influences. So Dominique Somda is part of the Carnegie-funded Ethics of Care research strand at Humor, and her work focuses on how inequality or egalitarianism emerges through everyday practices. And this interest has led her to engage with the anthropology of slavery, democracy, Christianity, and feminist and post-colonial studies. So thank you very much. Thank you, Dom. Please take it from here.
Thank you very much, Ralph. I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Okay. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me as a guest. And I saw that Fernanda is among the audience, and I want to thank her because she initially was the person who invited me to talk today. So thank you so much. I'm very, very pleased to be the first guest for the seminar this quarter. So today I'm going to present an article that is published this month. Actually, I think it was published, it was in the library a few days ago, but it's not yet online. So it's an article that is published in the French journal Terrain. And I've made a rough translation for you for the seminar to share it ahead. It's part of a special issue on bandits. The French title is Brigands, and it has articles about bandits from all around the world in very different social contexts. And for this issue of Terrain, I've worked with students from the Penningen Art School in Paris, who created the illustration for all of the articles and for my own. So, for example, on this first slide, you can see an illustration from Justine, and there is like 5 others in my articles. So I also thank them for their engagement and their creativity. Okay, so the text relates events that happened in Anouche, in the deep south of Madagascar, between 2012 and 2019, a time of intense repression of cattle rustling. The text describes how the era was turned or reinvented into a zone of exception. I analyze historical categories and tropes and stereotypes also that made it possible to frame the crisis in certain ways. I'm particularly interested in the construction of the figure of the enemy that lays the ground for human rights abuse. It's not a comparative text, but as I was writing this paper last year, I was thinking of similar process in my country, Burkina Faso, where parts of the country have been caught in cycles of violence in which banditry, terrorist attacks, and repression by military and vigilantes have become indistinguishable. Being fully human in southern Madagascar is to be able to maintain relations between the living and the dead. Cattle are essential in those processes. There are exchanges between parents during funerals, where they enable the dead to truly become ancestors. and they are ancestral in the humanity of man. The opposite of being fully human in the Tanush context is to be a descendant of slave. Not owning cattle or losing cattle means becoming like a slave. Slavery was abolished in 1896, but many discriminations are perpetuated. Descendants of slaves can't share the collective tombs of the descendants of free men, and for this reason, they can't marry them. Protecting the cattle is key because losing the cattle is losing freedom and dignity. The photographs are of charms that are called in Malagasy Udi or Oli. The one on the right, actually the one on the left, sorry, is the good type of charm. It's the one that people place on the cattle pens to avoid theft. And the one on the right is the wrong kind of charms. It's the one that cattle rustlers are using to protect themselves from bullets. It's also made of a zebu horn. In Anush, those two charms have opposite moral qualities. The morality of charms and of those who make them and use them depend on the purpose they serve. Christianity transformed somehow the divide and requalified these practices, all of these practices, as entirely immoral. Cattle rustling has had a similar history of moral ambivalence and was recently reframed. Depending on the period and the political agenda, thieves have been seen as brave heroes and resistance fighters or as terrorists. The last occurrence is one that is prevalent at the moment. Fa'avalu, the word that you can read on the screen, means enemy. This is a term that has been used, at least since the 19th century, to describe the cattle rustlers. Other works or words are common today to talk about them. In the paper, I used the term dahalu, which is from the standard Malagasy dialect, and malashu is more used in the southern region where I'm working. But the term in the past and the past use of the term fa'avalu are very revealing as they mark the political dimension of the phenomenon. Groups of people trying to escape the control of empire builders or foreign raiders were often relying on cattle theft. Cattle theft crises were, for example, more important at a time where slave predation intensified. And this was the case, for example, in the 19th century, following the expansion of the Mayan Empire. Which is also known as the Kingdom of Madagascar. This is quite a controversial issue, but yeah, I will for the rest of this presentation. I'm going to talk about the Mayan Empire, so Fa'avalu were also very present during the anti-colonial revolt of 1947. And through the independence process in the early 1960s. But Fa'avalu also named political opponents and resistance fighters, whatever their means of survival were. It was used through the French colonization, for example, to disqualify the anti-colonial insurrections and give an appearance of venality to their causes. This picture is from the film poster from Marie-Clémence Besse, that is entitled Fa'avalu, and it's on the 1947 events in Madagascar. The events were had caused the death of up to 100,000 men and women, especially on the east coast of Madagascar. Here's a picture of Ashwinta, a king of Anush. That's a picture that was taken during the so-called pacification of the South in 1897, the year that followed the colonization of Madagascar by the French. This is a picture of him, and he was not the king of Anoush. There was a dozen of them. He was one of them. And the picture was taken in La Réunion Island, where he was exiled and where he died that same year. Before the French 19th century colonization of Madagascar, there was a first attempt of colonial settlement, of French colonial settlement, that only lasted a few decades in the 17th century. The Fort-de-Fin colony experiment was actually contemporaneous to the establishment of the Dutch colony in Cape Town. French and Dutch in Madagascar were both raiding the coast of Anoush, where they forcefully took both cattle and slaves and shipped them to their plantation islands in the Western Indian Ocean. In the early 19th century, the South was conquered by the Mayan Empire that I mentioned earlier. Tanoush, when they described the imperial occupation of the Mayan, mentioned the loss of their collective humanity. They don't use the metaphor of slavery, but the metaphor of bestiality. Because their cattle was stolen from them by the Mayan officers, they couldn't trample their rice fields, which is a very essential moment of the culture of rice. And they were actually forced to trample the large fields that the settlers had appropriated as if they were zebus, cattle themselves. This still represents the epitome of dehumanization in contemporary Anoush. This photograph is entitled Boarding of the Cattle, and it dates back to 1904. During the colonial period, the cattle were shipped to neighboring islands and South Africa. Although the Favalu or Dalu or Malashu are today considered as being responsible for the forceful removal of the cattle from the communities, under the French and Mayan occupations, cattle were stolen directly or indirectly through taxes and fines. And the people that resisted these extractions or steal the cattle back were considered as being Fa'avalu enemies. Remanabila, which I talk about in the paper, was the public enemy #1 between 2012 and 2013. His face was everywhere. He embodied the evil and the mystical nature of the cattle thieves. The military and media treatment that were very that were everywhere during the hunt for Remanabila. In the military treatment and the media representation of Remanabila made of him a Malagasy Ben Laden, and this accepted characterization as a terrorist represents a remarkable shift from the Robin Hood, the social bandit figures that were made of the Dalu in many rural communities until that moment. Remanabila became a myth during his lifetime. But people are not even sure that he was even a real human. He was considered a ghost with superhuman abilities. Today, almost 8 years after he was presumed dead, people are not sure that he even existed. And I want to show you a few images that you can find on the internet about Remanabila. Remanabila hunted the mines, but he was also the object of great derisions, as any serious matter is. Those images are from a particular website that presents the parodies of Remanabila. They are very abundant on social media. And those humorous commentaries address the ubiquity of Remanabila in the press, as well as his suspicious ability to escape. Remanabila was considered to benefit from powerful allies amongst politicians and military. The length of the hunt and his ability to escape always were sparking conspiracy theories concerning the existing complicity he had. Captain Faneva is another ubiquitous figure at the height of the Dahalo crisis of the last decade. Faneva was a young gendarme sent to Fort-Dauphin and tasked with the repression of rural banditry in Anoche. He also received a mythical treatment that was comparable to the one that transformed Jimena Bila. Faneva was known for his extreme brutality, his propensity to behead the villagers that refused to pay their fees to the vigilante groups he helped recruit. Those vigilantes were mostly what was called Dahalo Niova Fu, which means reformed cattle thieves. It's literally it's like converted in their heart. So those reformed cattle rustlers had participated in very public redemptions with Christian undertones. Faneva terrified the population for 5 years and became a kind of a warlord. He presented himself as a Christ-like figure and a redeemer. But people, even those who approved of the new peace, denounced the human rights abuse that he was responsible for. I'm going to play a few minutes of a video by a young singer of Tuliar. Tuliar is a city in the west of Madagascar. And the young singer is called Marios. The genre is tsapik, which is a typical urban youth music in Tuliar. And this is a video that celebrates Faneva. I'm only going to play a few minutes.
Isorana l'Académie militaire malgache, namokani Capitaine Faneva, le vrai militaire. Capitaine Faneva saye, Capitaine Faneva saye, saye matuyana. Yakatarani ngisoni litane, marulwa chichi ubotanisha kwe. Capitaine Faneva, Capitaine Faneva, chimiretareta. Capitaine Faneva, Capitaine Faneva, chimabuswa tiperisera. Opération coup d'arrêt, papa. Capitaine Faneva, chimanata café. La femme en mission, toujours assurée. Fabandia tani dawa mosari efuta kichivuri esira chivulani eberu marumbi eludi mahali tano marumbe sakuavu apenyaki Capitaine Faneva, Capitaine Faneva, chimiretareta Capitaine Faneva.
Oh, okay. So, sorry, did you only add the audio?
Yes, it's only audio.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is the video off screen?
Okay, sorry, yeah. Okay, I'm going to try to, sorry. Okay, I'm going to try to share the video. Can you see it now? Can you see the? Do you see the video now, or just the audio?
Yes. We can see it. We can see the
Okay,
video.
I'm just going to wait like for a few seconds so you can see what I wanted you to see.
Yes. l'Académie militaire malgache namoaka ny capitaine Faneva, le vrai militaire.
Capitaine Faneva saye, Capitaine Faneva saye, say matukana. Nakatarani ngisoni bitani, marulwa chichi ubotanisha kwe. Capitaine Faneva, Capitaine Faneva, chimiretareza. Capitaine Faneva, Capitaine Faneva, chimabuswa tiberizera.
Opération coup.
Okay, I'm going to share to stop the share here, and I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. Okay, so I wanted you to see like the images of Capitaine Faneva surrounded by the Daru Nyovafu, the repented cattle thieves. There's in the article I describe like some of the largest events that were gathering those repented thieves around Faneva, and they were quite impressive. So there's a very important, like a very spectacular dimension to the kind of charisma he developed in the country. Oh, sorry. Okay, I can't stop it now. Okay, sorry. So the paper discussed the tropes used in the media representation of Faneva and Hemanabila in relations to historical categories of heroes, in particular the kings that are called Honjia and the resistance fighters that are called Fanalulai. I also described the violent games and performances that young men in Anush and the rest of Madagascar partake in. Those violent games are part of most renewal rituals and central in rituals like funerals. Here's a picture of the game of Ringa, which is the traditional wrestling game and one of the most popular performances of male violence. Another type of representation I focus on in the paper are Western films. Western played an important part in Madagascar since the late 60s and early 70s, before and during the Socialist Revolution. They were popular among the Tsale and Zwam, that were young men in the capital, Antananarivo. Zwam is actually an acronym that read as Western American Malagasy Youth. Zale and Zwam belonged to marginalized groups. They were either descendants of slaves or originating from the coast of Madagascar. There's a distinction between the coast that is supposed to be more African and the islands that are supposed to be more Asian and more white. And that distinction is has a complex history for which the French and the politique des races, the racial politics that was conducted there, for which that politics has a particular responsibility. For the Tsale and Zwam of Antananarivo, those Black young men, characters such as the one Clint Eastwood was playing were fans' favorites because they focus on the marginal and the loner outsider figures. In the article, I focus on the current revival of the Western with the success of several local productions in Madagascar during the last decade. Western made in Madagascar are quite conservative, and the marginal figure of the Dahalo are never seen as heroic. Here I'm going to play for you a short teaser made to promote a game, Dahalo, a video game that was developed by the production company Lume and released in 2019. It shows an interesting decor and emphasizes political issues. For instance, the video denounced the withdrawal of the state and allude to the collision between the military and the bandits. it's about destroying the Dahalo, the thieves, rather than allyship with villains. So I'm going to show that little video for you. And please, can you wave your hand if you can't see the video?
Peggy 18.
Okay, so I haven't played. I'm not a gamer and I haven't played that game yet. I wish I could, but I have read many descriptions. And what is interesting is the moral fluidity and flexibility that exists in the action that are led in the game. It's quite interesting also to see that the players as heroes are able to use like the same instruments such as charms that the Dahalo are using. But at the end, it's all about restoring the peace and the order of the society and destroying the Dahalo. So it's kind of transgressive in some ways, but the narrative is very clear and very oriented towards towards the good and the order. Commercial films, professional reports, and homemade videos representing real-life interventions against Dahalo are sold at the markets in Anoush. This is a market in Fort-de-France, the capital of the region. The paper mentions some of the scenes that can be found in the homemade videos, and I won't show them here. They are extremely violent and crude. Depicting the mistreatment and mutilations of the bandits, alive or dead, they are truly dehumanizing. The visual and discursive narratives of violence inflicted on their bodies contribute to its symbolic construct with an hegemonic design. So I'm going to conclude here. The representation of the Malagasy Deep South as Far West, and I kind of played on the American tropes here because it's in French. The title of my article is Politique Western, but I'm not sure it translates in English. I'm unsure how to really make it non-ambiguous. So I chose here to focus on the idea of the Deep South that can also be a little confusing considering the history of the American South. But okay, the representation of the Malagasy Deep South as the Far West was propagated in fiction and in famous legends. It entered the academic discourse and knowledge circulating among development experts and reporters. There are plenty of comparisons in the Malagasy and international press between the American Far West and the Deep South, the Malagasy Deep South. Banditry singularized the Deep South as a geographical unit that is hard to penetrate. In perpetual sedition, a space where conquered populations also retreat to resist empire builders. The consolidation of the cattle rustling networks and the violent interventions of the gendarme and the village vigilante are parts of the politics that rely on a frontier imaginary. Fictional realization provide patterns and tropes that contribute to the distortions found in documentaries. They can be part of the reinforcement of hegemonic positions that continuously shape this periphery, defined as a zone of exception, from which essential resources, agricultural, mineral today, and human are extracted. Thank you. I'm going to stop here and wait for your questions and the conversation.
Thank you very much, Dominique, for your presentation. So, and thank you for explaining the title further. So, so I get that the Deep South translation you've just said is also about, you know, the deep south of the states, which is also a semi-mythical or, you know, a literary or filmic kind of trope, the Deep South. And in the original La Politique Western, is that meant to be also this ambiguity of the Western as in the cowboy movie and the Western as in just the West or the North?
In French, so in French, the Western, like politique Western, can be understood as a geographical reality outside of the geographical representation of the Far West. So yeah. When we hear Western in French, it's about the genre. It's about a genre that also, of course, you know, has plenty of geographical representation, but it doesn't mean West. So even in the text, I talk about Westernization, but it's what I use in French. But in French, that doesn't mean becoming West, but becoming Western as the film. Yeah.
As in like the global North kind of West, the Northwest. Yeah, great. Thanks for that fascinating presentation. Yeah, there are some points in it I could pick out, but I'd like to ask our audience if they have any questions in response, or comments or questions. So Chikezi, you'd like to say something?
Yes, thank you, Ralph. Well done, Dominique, for a great presentation. I quite enjoyed it, and I was struck by your analysis of the how the theme of illegality is represented, and not just illegality, male violence, and how the idea of strong men is mythified in popular cultural products in Madagascar. And I was wondering, because in recent years I've begun to get interested in research around the idea of toxic masculinity and young people in Africa. And I was wondering what you feel is the implication of this kind of representation of men in terms of violence and illegality and toxic masculinity. What you feel is the implication of this in the present day Madagascar, and in terms of how masculinity is practiced or performed in that region today.
Thank you for your question. So it's an area that has very strong gender inequalities, and I'm not very used to, actually, to be honest, I'm not very used to think about masculinities. I'm used to think about about femininity. But what I was trying to think through those examples is actually like this. The impact on those models of masculinities for violence and certain political means. There's something that is quite interesting, is that in Madagascar, and not only in the specific region that I'm working in, like masculinities and violent masculinities have played a very important role, and in a way, very conservative role. It's not, sometimes, what is interesting is that sometimes when people think about that kind of violence, they think about like transgression and disruption. But in Madagascar, there are instruments of patriarchy, of the clan, of the elders, and I cannot not think about the work of my advisor Maurice Bloch on masculinities, and on how the elders are constantly using the vitality of the young men to do their deed and to subjugate women and to subjugate the new generation. So it's something about that, like that toxic masculinity is the way the system is functioning, and it's what is allow people to reproduce the lineage and the order and the very in a way very oppressive order on, you know, elders or have all the powers in this kind of context, and the figures that look like they are disruptive are always like instrumentalized, and that's also the case for the cattle rustlers. They are seen as a disruptive force, but at the same time, like the way they are believed to act and the way this thing is supposed to work is that they always the instrument of older men and sometimes older women, but mostly older men that have the power and the money and plan for the attacks and benefit from the from the system. So yeah, that's something that is at the heart of like traditional politics, and also at a broader level, that's at the heart of the politics at the national level, and, you know, the government, etc.
Great. Thanks, Dominique and Chikezi. I see Sanya has questions for you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for presenting such a rich and multi-faceted paper. It's very interesting for several reasons. I like the question of banditry, for instance. Banditry in Africa, cattle rustling, which has become a very big issue in West Africa. You mentioned that it's the same. Sorry, that is occurring too also in Burkina Faso. The problem of cattle rustling. Now, I'd like to know how that intersects with the issue of the terrain in Madagascar, in terms of maybe climate change. How does it affect the local and national politics? Are there parallels between that sort of banditry and those that are occurring presently in West Africa, which is a huge, amongst the Fulani cattle herdsmen and what have you? What are the distinctive features of banditry and cattle rustling in, for instance, Madagascar, that are distinctive, that are not, or similar to those happening elsewhere in Africa? That's one. And then I like when you played the music by Marius, it has parallels with the sort of music that occurs in the DRC and Eastern Central Africa. So how does that sort of connections come? Because the similarities are quite evident. The tone, the everything, the composition of the song, quite similar to what happened. And then so I wanted to know, for instance, how the parallels in pop culture between Madagascar, which is down south, and other, like the DRC, Tanzania and Kenya, and what have you. So I'd like, if you could explain some of those parallels and connections and, discontinuities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanya, for those two very interesting questions. So I'll start with the second question. So it's Madagascar is in Africa in a way. It doesn't. Malagasy people don't know that they are sometimes, or like have a very complex relationship with their Africanity and their continentality. But the pop music is one era where there's no fight. There's a lot of presence of African popular music and genre in Madagascar, especially Malagasy, for example, are very, very fond of Lucky Dube. I pronounce the Malagasy way. They say Lucky Dube, but the like reggae artist. And it was always been one of the most favorite artists in Madagascar. And there's plenty of artists, of course. Christian pop music is very African Christian pop music from Nigeria and elsewhere is very popular there. So I'm not surprised, even though I'm not very good at picking up like similarities in music. I'm not surprised by your impression of familiarity. And I have a friend that is actually a specialist of sapik, that kind of music, and that probably would confirm that. The first question about the continuity between like also climate change and cattle rustling, etc. I think I see first independently from the comparison with Western Africa, for example. There's a lot of impact, for example, of I don't know, of colonization in the way the landscape of southern Madagascar have been evolving. There's a notorious and famous event in the history of Madagascar that concerned the destruction of the cactus. I like it was a kind of like my English for environmental stuff is not very good, so it was Divine. Can you translate what is a cactus in English? What is it?
It's cactus.
Okay. So cactus, yeah, there was a species of cactus that was key for the ecosystem of the south that was destroyed by French colonizers to clear the way for the military penetration. So that also affected that affected the entire economy of the people that had herds and the people that were forced into cattle rustling. And that's something that happened in the 1920s, but there's certainly impacts of the politics, the environmental politics that were colonial or post-colonial, but always had to do also with the control of the population. And so there's this constant like interaction between like the desire to control and the kind of consequences that are also with like the cycles of violence with cattle rustling. So that's something that is yeah, that's one part of my answer. I'm not sure if I am able to go into the comparison between what's happening with the Fulani pastoralists in West Africa and cattle rustling in Madagascar. One of the differences is that you wouldn't find like this kind of duality between like farmers and pastoral population that is found in many places in West Africa. Like the kind they like people are both. They need both. They are defining themselves as both pastoralists and farmers. So it's not a question of ethnic conflict. It's quite there's not a lot of heterogeneity there. So yeah, I'm sorry. We can have a further conversation on it. I'm not finding like a proper answer to that now.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Susan, do you have a question at all?
No, not at the moment, but I'm really enjoying the discussion. Thank you so much, Ralph.
Sure. Any other comments? I mean, I was really interested in the figure of his name, Kapiteni Faneva, and the way he seemed to me like a kind of Captain Kurtz kind of figure, you know, from Apocalypse Now or Heart of Darkness. You know, the soldier who goes in their terms goes native in when he gets sent out to deal with the bandits. So it's interesting the way that that layering of narrative in terms of he's like this character that is from a movie that's from a book, and also the way that different kinds of media appear throughout. One of the concepts I'm interested in is anthropophagy, which in Brazil, you know, signifies this taking in of influences and digesting them and regurgitating them. So yeah, it seemed like in Madagascar, with the video games and the movies and the westerns, so much kind of circulation of these kind of Western and global products.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree. That's if you the kind of images that Fayeva is trying to create for himself is quite ambivalent, and I'm interested in how in those kind of contradiction, because clearly, like, Faneva is trying to be a redeemer, and he's distributing Bibles, and he's trying to transform the thieves into good Christians. At the same time, of course, is making them murderers and beheaders. So and also creating the rumors that he himself is a vampire. So there's a lot of complexity in how people are playing with the narratives to create their own legend and to ensure like a certain impact on the population, terrorize people, and also have an appearance of legitimacy with the Christian narrative.
Amazing. And Ibrahima, I think you have your hand up. Is that Ibrahima? No.
Yes,
I see a hand, but I don't hear him.
Yeah, please go ahead. I'm not sure if he's having trouble connecting, but we can't hear you. Yeah, please. Well, yeah. If at any point if you want to speak, then speak up. But we can't hear you at the moment. Let's see. Are there any questions from anyone else here? No.
I see Amina.
Okay, Amina.
Thank you. Mine is more of a general question. I was wondering if it would be perhaps possible for you to tell us a little bit about how you decided to write about this specific topic.
So a lot of my work in Madagascar was or is about descent of slaves, and is about this very like essentialist understanding of where people stand and what people are. And with the cattle roasting situation, my interest was in the fluidity that was allowed, you know, that was allowing people to like switch positions and switch qualities. So this was a very an image of the Tanu society that wasn't really explained by my model of a society obsessed with status and obsessed with rank that were inherited for generations. Here was like a situation where position could change from one decade to another, or from one moment to another, like gendarme becoming thieves and thieves becoming gendarme, and you know, good and bad being like, you know, all over, and people being also extremely flexible in their moral judgments, which is uncommon for what I know about it. And also my perception of anthropology is that, you know, I want to write about what people are talking about always. So when I go to Manamba or Fort-Dauphin and people are terrified by cattle rustlers and terrified by the beheading of villagers all around, like that's something that I want to, you know, to understand better.
Great, thank you. There's a question from Ibrahima in the chat. Can you see it there? Yeah.
Yeah. So what it remains concerning the heritage of French Empire colony, which has influenced the imaginary of Malagasy concerning Senegalese people. Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. There's actually like writing about like tirailleurs sénégalais in Madagascar, and what is interesting is that of course people have a very bad. The first answer is people have a very bad I don't know, representation of what a Senegalese is, because for Malagasy people, tirailleurs sénégalais were the people were used by the French colonizers to murder people, to murder, like the 1947 massacre and revolt, like resulted in 100,000 people dying, like not just from repression, but also from hunger. And but still, it's for Malagasy today. Senegalais, as they say, just Senegalais, but they mean like this, everybody that is related to tirailleurs Senegalais, or the stereotypes of brutality and colonial violence. There were little cases of, like, you know, solidarity between the colonized. There were Malagasy tirailleurs as well, so there were also Malagasy that were used by the French to murder and to terrorize other Malagasy people, and that's something like that is very present in the way that sometimes I wouldn't say it's not negrophobia, because Malagasy people see also themselves as Black, but like Africanophobia can exist sometimes in Madagascar. Like people are seen as terrifying. There's like a lot of myth around like the also like the physicality, like the physical, like like West African are seen as extremely like oversized compared to like Malagasy people. So it's like they are giants that have, you know, horses and that murder people. That's basically what it is. There's subtleties, and there's a few dozen like Senegalese people that have stayed after the independence and that have had different kind of positions, but there's a lot of that. So yeah, the history, there's like good historians that have worked on that matter, and that's a very interesting part of the Malagasy African relationship.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom. That is fascinating. Definitely learning a lot of information here, and I also see comments in the chat, Chikezi as well. That's interesting and insightful. So yeah, thanks Ibrahima for the question, and thanks Dom for exploring that. Yeah, are there any other questions or comments for Dom? No. Well, seems we are satisfied for now, and yeah, sufficiently tantalized with your research. So yeah, thank you very much for being the first in the series this year in 2021, and we look forward to next week, where we'll be hosting Sanya Osha, who'll be giving his presentation, and we'll be followed by other researchers, including myself. I think is on the 1st of April or something like that. So great, thanks Divine, thanks to the rest of the Humor team, thanks Susan for attending, and to everybody else. Cheers, good night.
Thanks, Fernanda.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Fernanda. You really, thank you. I see Fernanda logged on. Thank you for putting this together.
Yes, thank you very
really
much,
appreciate
Fernanda.
it. Yeah.
Thanks so much, everyone. It was lovely. Cheers.
Yes. I'm going to stop recording now.